I want to see more young people hired, like me. I started at a young age. I think I turned out okay. And I think
Yeah.
I think that's the whole point of this. And I think it's
Hmm.
kind of just like been flipped on it. Like you want to make young people at a disadvantage pay because they could be helping their families. And yes, there are some young people that are 14 and 15 that are helping their families, but they can't help their families if they can't get hired. So I want more young people to get hired so that they can help their families or save up money for their books or clothes or their entertainment and things like that. But if they can't get hired, how can they help their families?
So today on the show, we are joined by a familiar face in Nebraska politics, someone who has served her community at almost every single level. Jane Raybould, a businesswoman, a public servant, and now a state senator representing District 28 in the Nebraska legislature, previously serving as a Lincoln City Council member and the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners, and in 2018, the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate against Deb Fischer.
Correct.
Yeah. From city government to the state capitol, you've built a reputation for collaboration and policy-minded leadership, sometimes praised for your pragmatism, other times maybe challenged by your own party.
Just a little.
But today we're going to talk about all of that. But to begin, I always start with kind of an icebreaker question. If you could swap any place with any Nebraskan, past or present, for a day, who would it be and why?
I would say probably Governor Pillen.
Really?
Yeah. I think, I know he loves Nebraska, as we
Mhm.
all do, but I think he is misguided on a lot of issues. And instead of focusing on affordable housing
Mhm.
that matters to most Nebraskans, or affordable childcare, or making sure that we get out of our deficit, I find that his ideas don't sync up with my ideas as a business person and as a Democrat. So yeah,
Mhm.
I maybe for one day I could jump in right away and
Yeah.
pass a lot of legislation that would correct some of these wrong pathways that we're going down. His priorities are not my priorities. Let's put it that way.
So we have ran into each other quite several times, actually. I've seen you at the legislature, at the city council when I testified a few times. We've never actually like fully met or had a whole like one-on-one conversation. So I'm really excited that you're here today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I have watched you and I have admired all the work that you've been doing
Uh,
and your messaging and your outreach and your professionalism. So I think it's really
Aw.
great because you engage a lot of people. And I think that's the most important thing. You engage the stakeholders and you get the message out. And I love that stuff.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I did want to ask you, because I know the Journal Star had written about it, but you had gone through some personal things. So I want to see how you are doing, how your health is, and if
Yeah.
things are going well and how you've been.
Thank you so much for asking that. I'm doing well. I'm in remission.
Good.
I won't be cured. A lot of people in our state of Nebraska, as you know, unfortunately, so many families are touched by cancer. And I feel very fortunate that we have such great medical care right here in Nebraska at UNMC and right
Yeah.
here in Lincoln. So I'm in remission. Won't be cured, but I feel so much better than I did last year going through
That's
chemo.
good. Yeah.
And that's the important message, and really becoming a champion for other families who have to go through cancer.
Wonderful. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So I did want to ask you, so you've served on the Lincoln City Council, you've run for US Senate, and now you're in the unicameral. So what are some of the things that these different roles has taught you about how power actually works in Nebraska?
First and foremost, I think the most important role of an elected official is just to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to what matters to your constituents. Listen to the stakeholders in the community that your legislation impacts or might have an adverse consequence on it. So I feel I have been representing the same territory for going on 15 years. It's a district that I was born and raised in, and I have served as a county commissioner on the Lincoln City Council and now in the state legislature. It's funny, I call it the triple crown of government. And throughout that whole period of time, the thing I've loved and enjoyed the most is just walking and knocking in listening to people and asking them questions about how do you feel about this issue, and it just really engages people. And I think I'm very non-threatening. People feel that I'm approachable, that they can
Right.
engage me and share with me a lot of things that they probably wouldn't normally share. And I feel very honored and privileged to have earned their trust on so many issues, but mostly listening and trying to use whatever you have and tools to really enact sound policy and legislation. I also say that I'm a business person. I have been born and raised and have worked in business my entire adult life, and even as an 8-year-old. So I tell people I bring my business brain with me wherever I go. And when we look at coming up with policy, make sure I have the right stakeholders who understand policy and understand the issue thoroughly, and also looking at the numbers, crunching the numbers. Is this do I bring value to the voters that I represent? Am I doing the things the right way? Am I not creating a deficit or making it harder for Nebraska working families to have a life here in Nebraska?
Some people might describe you as a centrist or a pragmatic Democrat. Do you feel like that label hurts you or helps you in kind of a political landscape like this?
I think it's a fair label. I think it's funny when I ran for U.S. Senate, and I also ran for lieutenant governor in 2014.
Okay.
When I would go to different smaller communities, rural communities, they would say to me, "What are you?" And I would say, "I'm a Democrat and I'm a business person." And then they would, look at me very quizzically like, "How can you be a Democrat and a business person?" But we have a history of some great Democrats being just that, being business people.
What was that experience like?
It was so rewarding and so fulfilling. And, for full disclosure, I'm also a cyclist. So I've ridden my bike all across the state of Nebraska. And people are genuine, they're honest. Nebraskans are fiercely independent. And, we are on the verge of being libertarians in our state on so many issues. But it is so wonderful to hear people and their thought processes and what they're thinking and what matters to them, what matters to their families, what matters to their business. And so it has been just a great joy to be able to engage people at that level and listen to their concerns. In 2017 and 2018, when I ran, it was just when President Trump had been elected and enacting a lot of the same policies back then with tariffs, and talking to the rural community, how it would impact them and their farming or ranching livelihood, and to their detriment. And I remember going to so many, engagements or rallies or opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with a lot of rural residents. And I remember women dragging in their husbands and saying, "He voted for President Trump." And the husband would look very sheepish and, like, yeah. And with all the tariff policies, plummeting the price of soybeans and corn and just really creating tremendous amount of havoc in their own rural economy, I would say, well, I understand your husband voted for President Trump, but, he didn't vote for this stuff that was going on, with the tariffs and the chaos that they created and the damage to their livelihood. And so, the husband would feel somewhat relieved that I said, he didn't vote for this. And I think that's sometimes what a lot of Nebraskans say, like, well, we didn't vote for that.
I don't know. When I look at that and all the things that he campaigns on and the things he says, I mean, I feel like people know, right? Like, he's been very open and honest about what he wants to do.
You're absolutely correct on that. So, like he was saying this from the very get-go, but it's those same voters that turned around just recently and voted for him again, knowing full well that and now that he's, I would say, maybe wiser and smarter on how government actually works, he's going with lightning speed in implementing things that a lot of people didn't vote for.
So with some of the tension lately between elected Democrats and grassroots organizers, how do you navigate accountability when your vote doesn't align with progressive advocacy groups? Because there are some things going on that a lot of people might not be fond of or confused about. So what is kind of your response with that?
I think that is an outstanding question, because that's what we're working through right now with a lot of issues, such as the minimum wage. And I know maybe I'm jumping the gun, and I know you're probably going to want to talk about that in more detail. But That is a clear issue
Mm-hmm.
where there is some divergent ideas of how I represent my district that like I've established, I feel very honored to have represented all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And what is challenging with my fellow Democrats who I work with and have enjoyed working with all this time, I find that there is a lot of misinformation and misleading ideas that they have represented to all of our constituents and not really sharing the true line of reasoning for minimum wage increase.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of pushback, in Nebraska. One of the things that makes us so unique about being in Nebraska is that we have a unicameral.
Yeah.
That is totally different than any other state. The other beauty about our state is that we have such a powerful ballot initiative representing our second house, the people,
Mm-hmm.
which is another one of the most unique things about Nebraska. They have the power to do this that is enshrined in our Constitution that we all respect. We all respect. One idea that my colleagues are not fulfilling and sharing completely with all the people that have been watching what is playing out in the legislature right now on minimum wage is also enshrined in our Constitution, is the legislature's right in our state constitution right now
Mm-hmm.
to amend or modify a ballot initiative, the vote of the people, but we have a higher threshold in the legislature. So we have to have 2/3 or 33 votes anytime we do that to any initiative that our voters have voted on. And that's one thing that they fail to disclose or tell about. And, I often
Yeah.
say, like, well, when were you going to tell the people out there watching that we have that right to do that? And, it's my very same colleagues that are all of a sudden, they're introducing, like Senator Megan Hunt. She has a legislative bill to revisit the issue of term limits. The voters voted on term limits, but here, Senator Hunt, who's been one of the loudest critics of going back and modifying what the voters have approved with minimum wage, she herself is introducing legislation to go back once again and look at term limits. And to be honest, I support that. I support going back and revisiting policy and the practicality of implementing it. And Senator Conrad has also supported revisiting term limits. Senator Terrell McKinney is also going back and looking at the death penalty. I also support going back and revisiting that issue. Even though the voters have spoken on it loudly and clearly, times change, the issue change, people change, and what people want changes. And so when it comes to, going back full circle to the minimum wage, we have the right to modify and amend what the people have voted for. And I think when you look at that minimum wage bill, we went from $9 and will be at $15 starting January 1st, 2026. It increases to $15. That, I would say, is the critical elements in the ballot initiative. The second component of the ballot initiative is what do we do going forward after January of 2026? It's $15. But what happens in January 2027? The ballot initiative was clear. It said we want it increased annually, tied into the Midwest CPI. Now, if you look at our...
So for those who don't know, CPI stands for
Consumer Price
Index.
Yep, okay, yeah. And basically, what happens is in these last 5 years, there has been tremendous volatility. We have seen more inflation than we have seen in the previous 10 years happen in the last 4 years. So that volatility has created a very unpredictable for businesses, small businesses, on what that wage increase will be. So that is what I am modifying, that element that the voters have approved, working through that and capping it at 1.5%, up to 1.5%. Okay. That's where businesses can predict it. And we can talk more the impact that it is having already on many businesses, like daycare centers. Daycare centers, they have to pass all these wage increases onto the families that are really struggling to pay for affordable childcare. We know in our state of Nebraska that both parents have to work. And the numbers of our demographics show the majority of Nebraskan parents, both parents work outside the home. So that impacts their ability to pay for childcare. And I've heard from daycare centers, and I encouraged all my colleagues, like, don't listen to anything I tell you. Go out and talk to daycare centers, how they can't sustain all these wage increases. They pass them on to the families. Talk to nonprofits who are seeing some of their funding from the state of Nebraska cut, and right now they're seeing some of their federal funding being slashed as well. How are they going to be able to sustain all these wage increases? Go out and talk to your small town grocer. How are they going to be able to sustain all these wage increases? They're going to have to pass those costs of the additional labor on in terms of the cost of their goods and services. We're seeing this with the YMCAs, How are they going to be able to pay for all the referees for all the youth sports, from basketball to football to volleyball to soccer? Those costs they will be passed on to the families who participate in youth sports. So there's a lot of things that people need to consider how this is going to impact the goods and services that they need and how it's going to impact Nebraska families. So I want to say that I appreciate my colleagues tremendously, but I feel they haven't done their homework. They haven't talked to the small businesses. They haven't talked to the Chamber of Commerce's all across our state of Nebraska. They haven't reached out to daycare centers, that these things impact them in a detrimental way.
So to kind of piggyback off of that,
Yeah.
kind of wage increases and things like that causing people to pass on the prices of goods and services to the consumer, which, as you say, could make things more expensive or, not be able to pay for staff or, employees or things like
Yeah.
that and having to pass that cost on. So I guess what is the remedy for that? Because, the voters wanted this minimum wage increase because the cost of living is becoming unbearable.
Yeah.
So it's hard for people to make ends meet. It's hard for people to afford these goods and services. People having to choose between this or that, between, you've heard it, prescriptions or medication or, groceries or things like that. So what is the broader conversation of overall lowering the cost of living for Nebraskans? Because, this push for the minimum wage increase was a direct response to the cost of living becoming unbearable for people.
So, and that is a valid point. Families have been struggling with inflation and allowing, they have to make tough choices just with inflation alone. But what people don't realize is that with our increases in our state of Nebraska, we're putting ourselves as the 18th highest regarding minimum wage. Our surrounding states, Iowa is at $7.25, Kansas is at $7.25, Wyoming is at $7.25. We're creating an imbalance. Nebraska, on the other hand, has the 10th lowest cost of living in the entire United States. Now, what it's doing is it's creating our own internal inflationary cycle in our state of Nebraska that's driving up the cost of goods and services. Daycare centers, I'll hop back to that. When I've talked to daycare centers, I said, how do you handle all these wage increases? And they say, we pass them on annually to families as an increase. And I asked them as a follow-up, have any families had to drop out from, pulling their kids from daycare because they're trying to make their budget balance, with all the costs of food and the inflation on other goods and services that we have seen in the last 4 years. One daycare center, they said to me that they had 7 families drop out, which means we have a workforce shortage. We have a workforce crisis in our state of Nebraska. That means one parent had to stay home, and that's one less person in our workforce. Every time I look at the minimum wage, it's a balance. You create a balance of what our Nebraskans voted for and a balance to minimizing the impact that it has on our Nebraska families. And so when I say I bring my business brain with me, I literally mean I bring my business brain with me. I crunch the numbers and look at the impact it's going to have. But I think the narrative that doesn't get told is Nebraska has the 10th lowest cost of living in the entire United States. But it doesn't matter to what goes on with our Nebraska families right now. I know they're struggling. They're struggling with inflation, with affordable housing, with affordable daycare, and they're trying to keep up. And to be honest, our wages were not keeping up. And that's why back in 2014, I supported the increase in the minimum wage that we voted on. And I actually did not oppose the increase in minimum wage. But what we have seen through these years since we have passed the increase on, we have more data and more information how it's impacting primarily small businesses, nonprofits, daycare centers, youth sports, etc.
So with the people passing the ballot measure and the ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage, you did say the legislature has from my understanding, it was the legislature had to create the framework to implement what the voters had approved, but saying that the legislature can pretty much come in and circumvent that.
That is enshrined in our Constitution. However, this ballot initiative with the minimum wage was self-enacting, which means the language in it is pretty darn clear. I think we all agree the language in the minimum wage ballot initiative is very clear. The legislature has the right to modify it after it has been passed and after it's been implemented, and it has been implemented, and to reassess and create that balance. We have that right in the Constitution to do that. And we have done it. We heard testimony in the hearing from all the chambers of commerce, retailers, grocers, other retailers, yoga studios coming in and saying, you know, how are we going to be able to make it work? And like they decided to operate out of their house instead of trying to pay the overhead of renting facility. I mean, we've heard from a lot of stakeholders since it's been implemented. Some people have said, like grocers in small towns have said, you know, we have 2 open positions, but, you know, right now we're not going to fill them because we can't make our ends meet. I've heard from another grocer who said, you know, after 35 years, we decided to close down. We love our employees, but we can't make ends meet and keep our business operational. It's that input and feedback that we have heard since it's been implemented from so many stakeholders and the impact it has had on them to cause us to rethink, how can we make it better? How can we create that balance?
I don't know. I guess the part that I keep getting stuck on is just the cost of living, price gouging, if you will, or people raising prices because they know people are going to pay them. So then it becomes a tipping point too, because then if it's like, so tell me more about your bill. So the
Okay.
minimum wage will increase to
$15. Right now it's
$15.
$13.50
Right
and
now
will
it's
increase to
$13.50,
$15 January 1st, 2026.
and your bill specifically looks at the subsequent increases at a 1.5% per year increase.
Up to 1.5% per year, depending upon what the Midwest CPI is. So if the Midwest CPI is 2.8%, the increase will only be 1.5%. If the Midwest CPI is 1%, the annual increase will be 1%. So it'll be up to 1.5%.
But there's still a deficit there, no?
Uh,
Consumer price index.
there might, yes, you're correct. There might be a modest deficit, but so for full disclosure, I have my background in economics and business, and so
Sure. I do
sometimes
not.
okay. So just in a nutshell, there are some prices that are directly hit
Okay.
the consumer, and there are other prices that might lag, like the price of a car, like the price
Sure,
of
like takes
rental housing, the
Okay.
cost of building a new home. And it just depends on each industry and each sector. But the price of like daycare, that's a boom. That goes directly from, or it might be like the daycare centers have said, they do an annual increase. So that might be a lag in that one as well. With youth sports, it might be the same thing. That might be a slight lag. But ultimately, the prices are increasing. But I guess your question was, is there going to be a lag? Well, when I preface my remarks, right now in the United States,
Mhm.
Nebraska's minimum wage is the 18th highest. But our cost of living in the United States is the 10th lowest. So right there, you have an imbalance. So before, it took a while to catch up to where we are at right now, $15, we will have one of the highest minimum wages in 2026 in the entire United States, even when our cost of living is the 10th lowest.
Cost of living in sense of like rental prices, cost of living as in like
Cost of living is based on a whole host of consumable items, including housing, including transportation, including consumer goods that you purchase.
'Cause I look
and
at, like-
automobiles and hard durable goods and things like that.
I mean, I look at like cost of living and like the average rent price in Lincoln is like 1,300, 1,200, something like that.
I'm not following that one. Sorry.
I'm just saying. I mean, just like that's a lot. So
I mean,
like,
of like a rental, like
Yeah, like a
you're
rental.
talking about rentals. Okay, yeah.
Or like we see a lot like people are not able to afford homes like unless you are making a lot of money.
Well, we can dive into affordable housing because that's like its whole separate critter in itself. Like, why is housing so unaffordable? And there are like 3 factors that have really been so detrimental into the construction of affordable housing. I know you're not going to like this one, but I'm going to say labor. Labor and wages are one. Materials, the cost of materials in another. Inflation, well, I said 3, but I want to include inflation, but interest rates. When interest rates go up, the ability to go out for a loan, like if you're a builder of affordable housing, just to get the loan at like 4% or 5% interest rate, that adds on to the cost of trying to build that affordable housing. Right now, we have an affordable housing funding gap. So if you are a builder of affordable housing, you rely on many different pots to get funding from. And I don't know if you want me to go into all of that economic detail, but I'm happy to. But right now we have an imbalance. There is a tremendous need for affordable housing, but we have very limited inventory. So we have a funding gap in order to build more housing. The more housing you have, the more inventory, available housing you have, the prices have a tendency to come down. But right now we have a tremendous imbalance. We have a huge
takes a
need.
while though, right? Like,
yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. And, the city of Lincoln has been trying to outpace it. There's some great developers in our city of Lincoln that do affordable housing. But again, you have to have so many different buckets and pots of funding. Low-income housing tax credits. You have to get tax increment financing. You have to work with NIFA, Nebraska Investment Finance Authority, to get funding. You have to work with NeighborWorks that can help do that funding. You have to work with local banks that can provide more opportunities for loans and hopefully at a lower interest rates. I mean, there's so many opportunities. We have Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So there's so many different pots, but you have to be able to tap into each one of those pots in order to create affordable housing that is legitimately affordable for those families that need it.
I look at just like houses that I had seen for sale, like in the pandemic obviously didn't help because interest rates went the lowest that they have ever been. So everybody was running out and buying a house, which obviously drives up the prices of it because if, there's a huge demand, people are able to list their houses for a lot more than what they're probably worth. But, that was kind of the main question too, like that I pretty much had just about the whole minimum wage, because a lot of people feel like they're suffering. They're drowning, they're not able to make ends meet. And a lot of it too, to follow up, tell me more about like the carve out for the 14 and 15-year-olds.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
I read in the Examiner this morning that there was kind of a and you mentioned it before we started taping too, of the Dan Klaus amendment.
Stan Klaus. Senator Klaus.
Stan Klaus. Okay,
Yeah.
Senator Klaus. Okay, yeah. Tell me about kind of that, because a lot of people have argued that will create like a different tier of pay for somebody who might be doing the exact same job of somebody who's a few years older than that.
Okay, so when I started, I said there's 3 components to my legislative bill.
Mm-hmm.
The one component that you just referenced is the 14 and 15-year-olds. And there's a carve out for them. They start at $13.50, which is the current minimum wage. And that increases every 5 years at 1.5%. It does increase annually. Now, 14 and 15-year-olds, in case people don't know this, there are very strict OSHA guidelines. that prohibit a 14 and 15-year-old from doing most work in terms of touching any type of hazardous chemicals, doing hazardous work. They can't touch a slicer, they can't touch a fryer, they can't touch a compactor, they can't touch a baler, they can't use any type of heavy equipment. A 14 and 15-year-old is restricted on the hours that they work. They can only work 3 hours per day, cannot work later than 7 p.m. They can work longer on weekends. So basically, there are so many prohibitions on what a 14 and 15-year-old can actually do. I've heard from a lot of stakeholders saying, well, that makes sense because they shouldn't be paid a regular minimum wage because they can't do so many things. There are so many restrictions on the work that they are being paid for. There's a lot of training involved for 14 and 15-year-olds. However, I have heard from a lot of businesses said that don't have hazardous work. So I'm not going to name names, but there's a local chain of coffee shops would say, this is great. I would be so happy to hire 14 and 15-year-olds at $13.50 to help run a register for their coffee business and to hand the coffee to the individual who ordered coffee through the drive-thru. That's something that they very well can do. Can they make the coffee? Probably not. They can't brew it because then that would require them to deal with some type of equipment that prohibited by law, and this is federal law and state law, that they can't do. There are severe, hefty fines for any type of violation. And, you know, I'm a grocer. We have grocery stores, but we do not and have never, well, we haven't hired 14 and 15-year-olds probably for the last 20 years because there's so many things they can't do. We're hearing from businesses that, you know, we won't hire 14 and 15-year-olds because there's not a lot of stuff in our ag industry. There's the same, every industry, there's all these same prohibitions for 14 and 15-year-olds. It changes once you turn 16. So for the 14 and 15-year-olds, that's called the youth wage. That's the youth wage as part of my legislative bill. The third part of my legislative bill is called the training wage. And this is another thing my colleagues have somehow failed to mention to the viewers who've been watching us debate this issue in the legislature. The training wage in our state of Nebraska is something that the ballot initiative completely overlooked. It was an oversight. The training wage in statute right now in our state of Nebraska is 75% of the federal minimum wage. And you're saying, well, what is that? The federal minimum wage is $7.25. So 75% of $7.25 is $5.44. That's what any business in the state of Nebraska could pay for 90 days, a training wage of $5.44. Well, we all say that's ridiculous. Nobody pays it. And you're right. Nobody pays it because we have a workforce shortage. So we want to be able to hire workers. And so nobody is paying that training wage, but that is part of our statutes that needs to get cleaned up. And so as part of my bill, I'm doing a cleanup. I'm doing a cleanup on this language. And so the training wage that we have in my bill would be 90% of the Nebraska minimum wage, whatever the Nebraska minimum wage is, for 90 days. That's simple.
So you guys don't hire 14, 15-year-olds?
We don't hire 14 and 15-year-olds, although Senator Megan Hunt would lead you to believe that we do, but we do not. Because of the fines, primarily because of the fines, and there's so many businesses that don't do that either.
Yeah, I tried to get a job at your grocery store when I was 14. Now I know why.
Did we? And we didn't hire you?
No, you guys just never called me back.
Well, I know. It's hard not to be told that we don't hire. They should just say we don't hire 14 and 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
But back when I started, you know, like 60 decades ago or 60 years ago, I could work when I was 14 because they didn't have the OSHA guidelines. I was a donut fryer. I worked around an oven. I pulled product out of the oven. That is prohibited today.
So what if the administration currently changes that? Because I feel like I've heard rumblings of them trying to target child labor laws.
You mean the Nebraska?
No. The Trump administration. Because I mean they're doing a lot of changes as changes that you said at like a rapid rate. So I mean like I've heard people throw out comments of like, well, you should do away with this or we should do away with that. But
well, I mean, there's already do away with the prohibitions. Yeah, but you don't want a 14 and 15-year-old in a meat processing plant because some
people don't care. They just
Well,
want to
with
increase, their
yeah, but they're not allowed to nowadays. They can't do
yeah.
that work. It's hazardous. It's bone chilling, back breaking work to be in a food processing plant like that. So,
There were some research data that I had found, and if interested, I could forward this
oh
to your
sure,
office. But University of Michigan, in April 2024, had a study that they found most independent businesses were able to absorb higher wages with minimal staffing changes. UC Berkeley did a study in March 2023 that there were no job losses in small businesses. So, have you specifically heard from small businesses that have said because of this minimum wage increase, we're either going to have to let people go or we are going to completely just stop our hiring or try to downsize?
yes, I have heard from all number of the businesses that I have mentioned that they're going to
In
leave this
various different industries.
various different industry. And I encourage my colleagues, like I said, don't listen to me. Go and talk to your constituents. Go and talk to your small businesses. Talk to your chamber of commerce that can tell you exactly what's going on. And I also want to say that for that type of study, there's also other studies that show that there are that small marginalized group of youth and wages and teens, and we want them to be employed. But there are businesses that review how many they want to hire and how many they can afford to hire. And they've said that that is the most vulnerable group of young people, and they're the ones that should be hired, but they're not hiring them. And that leaves those youth at risk for getting involved in other things instead of maybe having a paid internship or having a paid job. The idea is to hire that group and hire that group at an affordable wage where they learn important life skills. Studies have shown that the sooner that you enter the workforce, that you're exposed to all variety of people that you may never have had an opportunity to come in contact. So you learn invaluable life skills. You learn how to talk to people. You learn how to work alongside other people that you might disagree with on how sometimes they think or how they get things done, but you learn these type of skills. And those that learn these skills at a younger age are more likely to advance in other sectors of their life, other work opportunities. And ultimately, there are other studies that show that they have more economic advantages, having started these opportunities at a younger age. But with businesses, they also have to balance their budget. And they do have to be able to make a living, and they do have to be able to follow all the rules and regulations when it comes to the workforce they hire. And again, it goes back to the balance. I want to see more young people hired, like me. I started at a young age. I think I turned out okay. And I think
Yeah.
I think that's the whole point of this. And I think it's kind of just like been flipped on it, like you want to make young people at a disadvantage pay because they could be helping their families. And yes, there are some young people that are 14 and 15 that are helping their families, but they can't help their families if they can't get hired. So I want more young people to get hired so that they can help their families or save up money for their books or clothes or their entertainment and things like that. But if they can't get hired, how can they help their families?
And so the helping them get hired is, you kind of lost me there. So like
Helping them to get hired at a lower wage, because that incentivizes businesses to review and reflect and think. If they're not having a hazardous occupation or exposed to hazardous chemicals, there's some things that young people, 14 and 15-year-olds can do. And this is to incentivize businesses to hire them.
What if the businesses don't feel incentivized by that? Because it's like, why would I?
Well, just like us, we don't hire them because the penalties, should they, like if somebody says, hey, Jazari, could you take my shift so I can go to the football game? And you say, yeah, I want to pick up more hours. But then that becomes an OSHA violation because you've just exceeded the number of hours that you're allowed to work as a 14 and 15-year-old.
Has this like been articulate? Like, have you tried to articulate this like to your colleagues as much as possible, especially on the floor? Because social media is going to do its thing.
Yeah.
You see a lot of like pushback on social media about like what
Yeah.
this is actually about. So I mean, trying to push out the message of like this is why I'm doing this, to try to incentivize, businesses to be able to hire young people. Because like you said, there's a lot of young people that actually work not because they want to, but because they have to,
Yeah.
because cost of living is expensive, inflation, their families getting disconnect notices, so they have to go and do XYZ or work summer jobs, detassel, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be, to try to help make up whatever deficit is in their household to, be able to, you know, live, to exist.
And that's so fundamentally important. We know that having access to a job creates opportunities and it helps families. But sadly, I don't think it has fit the narrative of my colleagues as you hear them in the chamber. They don't mention a lot of the things that I've just mentioned to you. They really are looking for a villain. They want to vilify someone. They want to beat up someone. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been getting pretty beat up on a regular basis, even
Yeah, people
outside.
aren't happy.
Even
They're
outside.
not.
But, when I sit down with people
Mhm.
one on one, and when I've talked to nonprofits, they go, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Like
Mm.
we could hire, younger people to come in and help do a lot of administrative things at a lower wage. That would be so wonderful. And what a great training opportunity for them to, and nonprofits are always struggling with funding. They have to have one fundraiser after the other, or apply for this grant or that grant, or apply for federal loans, or apply for loans or grants from the state of Nebraska. And with budget crunch and budget deficit, there's a lot of funding that gets dried up. But they want to do nonprofit work because that's what they're passionate about.
Mm.
That's what their calling is. But how can they do it when they're faced with the same budget deficits and lack of funding? So they would be willing to hire interns. And that's the whole turning it around for the intention of this legislation, instead of the narrative that they want to pursue, that like this is harming our young people. Well, how is it harming them? We want them to get a job. We want businesses who are struggling to either make their payroll or to make sure that they can do the great things that they continue to do. And we're talking primarily small businesses and mid-sized businesses that are really feeling this impact. Larger businesses, based on the study that you referenced,
Mm.
they can absorb some of these cost increases without having to pass them on. But there comes that threshold where they ultimately will have to review and reflect and pass on these costs to the consumer.
Are you committed to that? I mean, like, let's say everything works out in your favor, how you want with your bill, and it goes, it's signed into law exactly how you want it with the compromises that you have made. So subsequent to that, with trying to help young people, you're not no longer you've retired from the vice president
Yeah,
of your family's company, but you're still on the board
sure.
and things like that.
Yeah.
Are you committed to still trying to make some changes to try to help young people get more jobs or things like that? I mean,
Oh, of
past
course.
this?
Of course. I mean, that not only does it benefit that young person in learning life skills that will see them through, it helps their families. It helps our Nebraska economy. We have a workforce shortage. And I think what the other message that's getting lost is, hey, businesses don't have to pay just the minimum wage. Or, hey, if you're in your 90-day training period, you're doing a great job. We're promoting you to, full minimum wage at day 15. You're amazing. We want to keep you. Businesses have to be smarter. They have to be competitive with not only the wages they offer, but the benefits they offer to their workforce if they want to attract and retain workers. And
Mm.
so, businesses are smart. They have to do the smart thing and they have to be competitive. And so if, businesses might start you out at $13.50, but if they want to keep you, because you have many choices. When I was doing orientations as a greeter in our company, the first thing I would say to all the new hires, I would say thank you. Thank you for wanting to work for our company. Because of our workforce shortage, you have so many opportunities. You could be working for so many other retailers. It's up to us to demonstrate that we're a good company, that our company actually cares about the
Mhm.
people that are with our company, that we offer competitive wages and competitive benefits.
Um, just to kind of just address like what a lot of people are probably thinking or saying is that this is just to help your own bottom line. This is to further your own interests with your business because your family runs a very like powerful like grocery business, one of the bigger ones here in Lincoln. What do you say to those critics who think that this is just self-serving?
Yeah, and I've heard it's very self-serving, very self-centered, very selfish. It just you're a greedy operator. Um, and for full disclosure, I've signed all the Nebraska accountability and disclosure forms. I signed it for the state of Nebraska. In the Nebraska legislature, we have many people representing many businesses. For example, for banking and insurance committee, we have a banker who is the chair of the banking and insurance committee. He brings a tremendous amount of expertise to that committee. I'm on the business and labor, and I bring a tremendous amount of expertise and knowledge to that committee. And that's how I serve. I serve the people of Nebraska and I serve my constituents, but I also bring balance because I understand both worlds. As a Democrat, I feel that I have been honored to have been entrusted with how people have elected me and have continuously elected me. I tell it to them straight. I don't sugarcoat it. I don't misinterpret the facts. I tell it to them straight, and I work with them and I help them understand. And if my messaging is poor, then that's on me that I haven't told it to them straight. And I feel right now that I don't think people are being told the real narrative. They're being told a narrative that fits in with what they want to believe. Like, yeah, she's all in it for herself and her family. And I would say, look at my 15 years of service to the community, to my city, and now to my state. Have I been in it for myself? I don't think so.
Are you concerned this might help or hurt your election in 2026?
Well, you know what? Every time I've run for an office, I have never cared one bit about being elected or even reelected. If I do the things for the right reasons and I am clear on my messaging, then I'll get reelected. But I always, if the voters disapprove, I support them. If I'm not living up to their expectations of me, then they should vote me out. Absolutely. And I would support that 100%. For all the ballot initiatives, I support all the ballot initiatives. And I've never stood in opposition to any of them. But I know that when it came to the minimum wage, there's no way any of the businesses could have raised $3.6 million in a short amount of time to counter all the funding that they got from outside sources, outside of Nebraska sources. Businesses are smart too. They know that there is no way they could have raised that amount of money to be a counter narrative to what the minimum.
You don't think the businesses could have came up with the money?
No, they couldn't have. And I'll tell you why. I've run and have been involved in 2 statewide races. Mm-hmm. I ran as lieutenant governor in 2014 with Chuck Hasselbrook. And, with a statewide race, there is unlimited donations on that front. And so in that race, there was raised $3.2 million over 2 years for that type of campaign in 2014 with unlimited contributions. When I ran for U.S. Senate back in 2018, on all the federal races, there are severe restrictions on how much funding you can raise. And for the U.S. Senate race, I raised $2.3 million. And so that was considered a tremendous amount of funding back then. But
especially
that was
for a Democrat in a red
right,
state, yeah.
Yeah, and coming primarily from fellow Nebraskans. That makes it tougher. Now this, for the minimum wage, was very different. They got $3.6 million from outside sources, from contributions. And if you look on the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission website, you can see exactly where they got that $3.6 million from. That's a lot of money in one boom. Well, 2 checks. That's a lot of money being able to do that. And there's no way the businesses could have responded and raised all that kind of money because you know why? Because they could see that, hey, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, would you like to make $25 an hour? What do you think you would say?
Times are tough.
Times
Why
are
not?
tough. Yeah, of course. You would say, sure, I'd like to be paid $25. How about, would you like to be paid $35? Yeah, of course. So what I'm saying is that it would be tough. Let's talk about term limits. Fellow Nebraskans have voted consistently for term limits. Even in the city of Lincoln, we voted for term limits for our mayor consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, we've only voted for it once. But people love term limits. They want the ability to validate you or vote against you or not reelect you. And I support that 100%. So
who's trying to revisit term limits?
Senator Megan Hunt has a piece of legislation, and Senator Dover, they both have legislation to take it back to a vote of the people, even though the people have spoken loudly and clearly on term limits. And also Senator McKinney has it on death penalty. And
are those still in committee or are those out of committee? I can look. I'm not going to make you think off the top of your head like that. Yeah.
They're executive committee, and I think both are out. Senator Hunt's and Senator Dover's, and then I'm not sure about Senator McKinney's if it's out of committee.
Okay.
But it would go to the executive committee because it's to put it on the ballot.
Okay.
So
the Nebraska legislature is officially nonpartisan, but obviously everybody knows where everybody stands, and you kind of have your group that you kind of work with or try to build coalition with. Do you think this might cause fractures in that?
I think some of the comments that have been personal attacks have really created fractures.
Like personally, like personal relationship wise, or?
Yeah, I think both, to be honest with you. Yeah, the personal attacks from colleagues that you admire and respect.
Yeah.
Have been really, really hard to deal with when there is really hurtful, harmful legislation that we're going to be dealing with tomorrow. I've never seen, and I've been around a long time and I have pretty tough skin. I mean, I've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
But I've never seen such personal attacks as I have witnessed in the legislature this year from my Democratic colleagues. And I think it's because, I don't know, maybe they need a punching bag. And that's okay. You can punch me all you want. But when you mislead voters and mislead the people that are listening to this on TV, that's where I think is wrong.
I read an article in the Nebraska Examiner this morning that came out. My friend Zach wrote it. And he had quotes from Senator Conrad of kind of some of the comments that she had made, but she still said at the end that she still considers you a friend and, doesn't want that to like harm that. So, I mean, politics is wild.
Yeah,
politics can get dirty. So, I mean, yeah, I've always wondered how you can deal with that and then still, maintain that relationship behind the scenes.
Well, sometimes an apology goes a long way. And I can, when I was a county commissioner, I was a lone Democrat with 4 Republicans, and they were tough. They were mean. They did, redistricting and did other stuff.
Yeah.
But, to their credit, and this is why I really have grown so fond of some of my former Lancaster County commissioners, they would come back to me and say, you were right on this issue.
Wow.
And we're sorry we gave you such a hard time. And, fellow county commissioner who was really, really tough with me, and I fought back. And they all apologized afterwards. And I know that when I've run for lieutenant governor or run for U.S. Senate, my friend Bernie Heyer would be the first one to call me and say, you know what? You're going to be a great U.S. Senator, or you would be a great state senator. And this is like the difference. It's important to say, hey, I said some things I kind of regret, or maybe I crossed a line. And again, don't listen to me. Listen to other friends that have been telling them, like, did you really need to go that far and say those things?
Have you had some like conversations behind the scenes with some of your colleagues that have kind of come around to your way of thinking about this issue?
Oh, yeah. And
I mean, like specifically Democratic colleagues.
Oh yeah, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, when she said, "Oh my gosh, this is the training wage we have in our books right now," paying $5.44 an hour. She goes, "That's bananas," that's, and so there are colleagues that if they actually read the language of the bill, and if they actually read what is in our current statute that we're trying to change, they would probably say, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Just like I'm telling you and your listeners are out there, it still might make them mad, but at least, I've had a chance to share my story
Perspective, yeah.
and the reason behind enacting this. And this is why, the majority of the state senators support this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is this coming up on the agenda tomorrow?
No, it won't come up tomorrow because
Which one is coming up tomorrow that you
it's
mentioned?
LB 89. That's the Stand with Women Act that prohibits transgender youth
Yeah, I
from
do.
using and participating in sports and using locker rooms and restrooms. It's harmful, hateful legislation. That'll take up a good chunk of
Yeah.
the.
Is that general file?
It's on general file, yes.
I do actually want to talk about LB 605 briefly. It aligns with the NSAA guidelines for trans youth in sports. So, what is kind of the difference between that and what's coming up on?
So I had proposed LB 605 that would put in statute the language from
the NSAA.
NSAA guidelines, working with a lot of the parents of transgendered youth and students that want to participate in sports. And then the parents of transgendered youth asked me to please pull it. But I just want to give a little bit more perspective on it.
Sure,
Basically, the NSA, which is the high school sports regulator, came up with guidelines back in 2016 so that transgendered youth could participate in high school sports. They would form, each school district would have a small confidential committee that would be formed to review an application from a student who is transgender that would like to participate in a sport, and work with the parents, the physicians, and all this medical records would stay completely confidential.
Okay.
And since 2016, 8 students have applied to be considered to participate in a sport. And out of that group of 8 students, 6 have been approved to participate as a transgendered athlete. And for those that are trans female, there is a higher threshold where their testosterone levels would be checked on a monthly basis, but all this would be confidential.
Okay.
And so that is something that has worked well all these years for all those athletes. But the trans parents of trans youth said, can you please pull that legislation, because there's only so much emotional energy and a trauma that they can deal with, that they wanted to fight Senator Kathleen Kauf's bill, LB 89. They didn't want to put their families or their children through these battles twice on a bill that they supported, LB 605, that would codify the NSAA guidelines, versus fighting to prevent LB 89 from being passed. And so
too much going on.
Well, I mean, what they've been enduring now with a lot of issues from President Trump have been very traumatic, very destabilizing for a lot of young people that are transgendered and older adults as well, trying to deal with who they are, but also having all this harmful legislation that devalues them.
So, do you think there's a danger in turning just school policy into a culture war? I mean, because that sucks a lot of the energy out of the room. I remember a couple of years ago during that one filibuster, there was a lot of stuff that just was not able to get accomplished because of, culture war policy.
You're absolutely correct on that. I remember that well, and that was just trying to restrict gender-affirming care that is medically recommended. I mean, it was awful. It was very divisive. It ruined.
That was your first year there.
It was really awful.
What a way to come in.
It's like, why are we doing this? What problem are we trying to solve?
Yeah.
And it was really probably the worst of Nebraska out there ever. So, and I'm fearful that we're going to just have another repeat of that, and that's not something that we want to see happen.
piggybacking off of that, what are some major things that you think the legislature should really be focusing on to solve? Like, what are some big issues that
Well,
we need to get through because we got bigger fish to fry?
we got so many bigger fish to fry. And of course, our budget. We have
Yeah.
a big fat budget deficit. And, and I keep I'm sounding like a broken record with my colleagues. This is something that was self-inflicted. It all started with income tax reductions and then accelerated income tax rate reductions for the top 2 tier of the wealthiest Nebraskans and for corporations. That was wrong. That created a huge gaping hole right from the beginning of it's unsustainable. The first year it was a negative number of 395 million. Next year it was 489 million. The next year 628 million. It's unsustainable unless you broaden your tax base. But that's something that my colleagues voted for. And again, Senator Conrad and myself were the only 2 state senators that voted against it because it's unsustainable to give these type of income tax cuts. Nobody was complaining about oh, my income tax bill is so high. Nobody. I've knocked thousands of doors. Nobody ever said that. But every other door, people would say, my property taxes are just, are harming my family. I can't pay it, or my elderly parents have to move out of their home. We've heard horror stories like that. But nobody was complaining about their income taxes, yet that's something that the state of Nebraska did and created this budget deficit. So we're going to have to make amends, but we shouldn't be making amends by cutting programs that help families, like all the funding for health and human services is being cut, funding for our nonprofits is being cut, funding for mental health is being cut.
Mhm.
That is absolutely wrong. And, that's going to be the next battle looming after we deal with LB 89 on Stand with Women.
Yeah, Senator Dungan was just here. He said the same thing.
Yeah.
He said, if I'm being frank, we put ourselves in this situation because we focus on giving such big tax cuts,
Right.
To corporations and income taxes and stuff. And so, yeah.
It doesn't work unless you have a plan, like how many more corporations are going to move to our state of Nebraska?
Sure.
And how many more wealthy people are going to move to our state of Nebraska? And I kept asking them this question. If you don't, you've just shrunk your tax base and your funding, how we need to broaden our tax base. And that's why, Senator Bostar is looking at, online gaming and gambling as a revenue source, enacting and putting into legislation with the appropriate guardrails for medical marijuana. That is something that needs to get done. Things that will help with our revenue. We have to be focused on issues like that.
A couple years ago, this was actually during your first session, there was a rally outside where there were youth doing a rally about gun violence.
Yeah.
And they had asked you to come out and speak.
Yeah.
What is kind of a follow-up to that? Like, what are some of issues that you've been looking at or, potentially trying to draft legislation just about surrounding gun violence?
And that issue is really something that I'm so passionate about. And we very narrowly lost that battle against, doing away with concealed carry. And so, we need to look at red flag laws. And I introduced something that was, instead of calling it outright a red flag law, suicide risk protection orders, and trying to get legislation like that passed and get it on the table. I hope to try to do that again next year to bring that back because, we have an increased number of domestic violence cases just most recently where guns were involved in assaults and that we really need to get addressed. We know that in our rural community, suicides by firearm have the highest level. And so having ready access to firearms is so detrimental to not only youth, but all Nebraskans, and coming up with really common sense, sensible gun safety measures that most people want and agree on. So that's something that I'd like to work on next year. It just depends. Sometimes the makeup of your fellow legislature changes, and so I'm hopeful that we can get some practical things in place that everyone can support.
Awesome. Well, I have just 10 quick, we do this with every guest.
Okay.
So there's like a rapid fire round where you just answer Some of the stuff, they're just fun questions we think
Okay.
of. What's a bill you admire that you did not write?
It was Senator Justin Wayne's bill on making sure that your voting rights were restored once you completed your felony sentences. And so I didn't write it, but I did prioritize it, and we got it passed, and voting rights were restored after you served your sentence. And so that we had an increase in the number of folks that were eligible and able to vote last year in 2024. And I was very proud of that.
Awesome.
But I wish I wrote it.
One guilty pleasure TV show.
I love Game of Thrones.
I love that.
I love it. Yeah.
I was very unhappy with season 8.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. I was sick a couple of weeks ago, and they started to show the last season. And, when you're on the sofa, I was like, I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm sorry. I really liked the last season.
No, you're good. House of the Dragon, have you been watching that
Oh,
too?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
I never would have taken you to be a Game of Thrones fan. That's
Well,
awesome.
my son got me addicted to it. So, yeah. I also like True Blood. So,
Awesome. Go-to road trip snack.
Go-to road trips. Okay. Well, cycling, any type of cycling. And I think the Ride for Pie in Elmwood is coming up June 5th or something. So cyclists ride for food. Or we're foodies, but we cycle. So
nice. First job you ever had?
My first job I ever had was when I was 8 years old, selling fireworks in the fireworks stand in front of our first grocery store. I love fireworks.
I've always been a hustler like that too. Like, I feel like I've been working forever. A song you secretly know all the lyrics to?
A song I secretly know all the lyrics to. Oh gosh, I am not okay. The song I sung, Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road. Don't ask me to sing it, please.
Okay.
You'll offend your listeners. So,
most underrated part of Lincoln?
Underrated part of Lincoln. Oh, well, I was going to say our bike trails, but I think that's
could
not
be
fair.
too.
Yeah, but that's not fair. I think Lincolnites, we love our bike trails.
Yeah.
Oh man, you're stumping me. Underrated part of Lincoln.
These are questions you just don't think about. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll stick with the trails. I mean, that's a weak answer. Sorry.
I enjoy the trails. I like them.
I love them.
Yeah, they're awesome. Dungan talked about how Nebraska is really good for bike tourism.
Oh, sure. Yeah, he has done the Tour de Nebraska. I think we did it 1 year together.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nebraska is phenomenal for bike riding. It is extraordinary. I mean, so just in Lincoln, Nebraska alone, we have like 190 some miles of trails. And even Lonely Planet gave a shout out to Lincoln, Nebraska as having some of the best bike trails. And state of Nebraska is the same way. People are so friendly. And when we do Tour de Nebraska bike ride or bike ride across Nebraska, in Ragbury and in Iowa, I mean, you get to know your state so well. And
Awesome.
It's beautiful. I mean,
It is.
It's gorgeous.
One law you think everyone should understand better?
I think our right to vote. I mean, to me, that is fundamental. And that's how you make changes. And that's how you get the people that share your values elected. So I think making sure that young people know that they can vote when they turn 18, and how they can vote is so important. Voting by mail is fundamental to 18 counties in our state of Nebraska. So I think making sure that people know how to do that fundamental right.
It is mind-blowing how many people just don't vote.
Yeah.
Quite sad, actually.
Yeah.
Which Nebraskan do you think should have a statue that does not already?
Which Nebraskan? Oh gosh, I was going to say Standing Bear has a statue. Malcolm X has a statue. And I think Willa Cather has a bust in a famous writer. Okay, what Nebraskan? Probably, I think my brain is like clicking off at this point in time.
How about this? A book you would recommend?
A book I would recommend. Okay, so one of the books that I've just recently read twice for our book club. I'm in 2 book clubs. It's No Two People. No Two People
Okay.
And it references no two people read a book the same way, and they take away different things from the
Yeah.
book.
Nice.
Okay, I think of a statue, Coach Osborne.
Oh, wow. I just met him the other day, actually, for the
Yeah.
first time. Yeah.
He's such a good man.
He is. He's very
Yeah.
kind. Your favorites, this might get you in trouble. Your favorite small business in District 28.
My favorite small business in District 28. Well, I love Cultiva. Oh my gosh,
That place is good too.
I love Cultiva.
Yeah.
Great coffee. Just their omelets are outstanding.
And lastly, if you were not in politics, what would you be doing right now?
I would still be working in our family business. I have been so fortunate to work with my brother, who I love, and I got to work with my dad when he was alive. And I think it makes us unique, where it's a great gift to work with family members that you love
Yeah.
and like, and can leave and still be great friends and not harbor any bad feelings.
Yeah.
It's a great, privilege. So yeah, I'd still be in business. I love business. That's who I am.
Anything else you want to share that we didn't talk about? Any words of wisdom, advice, or things like that?
No, thank you for inviting me. I do appreciate that very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Welcome back anytime, and best of luck with everything in the legislature, and thank you for all the work that you do for Nebraskans.
Well, thank you. All right.
That was it. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He's going to grab a few more pictures, but...
Oh, with the mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll just be talking about
Raybould.